We really are grateful and privileged. We feel privileged to have you all in this room today. My name is Olushola Ismail. I'm the Strategic Alliances Manager for the department. I believe I've reached out to quite a few of you on LinkedIn, and I'll be reaching out to many more. Please accept my invite and connect with me. The intention is to have many more of these going forward. So once again, thank you for honoring our invitation. We look forward to building and sustaining a long-term relationship with each and every one of you. So thank you. I believe that the head of department, Professor Eva Sorensen, will be going next. So please join me in welcoming her. Thank you.
No, I will start afterwards. You can hand over to me.
Okay. So also a warm welcome from me to all of you. I recognise a number of the faces of the people that are here today. Some not, but hopefully I'll get to meet you a little bit later. What I'd like to do today is to not look at the history of the department, because we have a number of people who lived that history who will be speaking to you in a little bit. So what I'd like to do is to just give you a snapshot of where we are today. What is chemical engineering at UCL per today? Going to start with some general, more UCL news. UCL this year was recognised as the University of the Year by the Times and the Sunday Times in their Good University Guide. We were particularly recognised for our impactful research on global issues, our innovative curriculums, our visionary new campus in East London, which a number of you visited this morning at UCL East, as well as student life and graduate prospects. So this was a very nice recognition. We recognise all of what they said there, of course. Absolutely. Now, UCL in numbers, just to remind you, we were founded nearly 200 years ago. So in a couple of years, we're coming up to our bicentenary. So we're celebrating 100 years now. UCL is nearly 200 more years ahead of us. So there will be some celebration then as well for you to come back to and take part in. UCL is ranked 6th in the world as a university. That number is taken as the mean of 5 different rankings, because the rankings obviously are looking at different things, so mean different things. We like this number because we come out quite well. We now have a lot of students. A large number of undergraduate students, a large number of postgraduate students, as well as PhD students. We are the biggest university in the UK now. In terms of research, there's something called the Research Excellence Framework that takes place every certain number of years, where all the universities and all the research units in the UK are ranked, and UCL was ranked 2nd in terms of research power in the whole of the UK, where 93% of all staff were recognised as being world leading or internationally excellent. I think for the units that we were under as a department, that number was even higher. So this shows that we are able to not just do education, but also do research at a very, very high level. In terms of faculties, so this lists the numbers of students by faculty. You'll see engineering there highlighted in green. We are by far the biggest faculty. We are almost the size of a middle-sized or small university elsewhere in the country. So over 8,000 students, not all luckily in this building, but although it feels like it sometimes. So we've really quite quite a lot going on within the faculty. Our department, founded 100 years ago, that's why we're all here now celebrating that it's been 100 years since we were founded. As a chemical engineering department, of which there are hundreds and hundreds all over the globe, we are ranked the 19th in the world. This is a ranking that we have had for about the past 5 years. We had quite an increase from sort of a decade ago, and this is the level that we feel is appropriate for us and where we would like to remain, maybe climb even a little bit higher. In terms of members of the department, we are just shy of 1,000 now when we're counting everyone, so it is quite a large operation. Those of you who were here a long time ago may even remember the names of everyone that were in your cohort at the time. Not so any longer. In terms of departmental staff, we have in total 160 staff members. We have 33 dual track academics. That means academics that are doing both teaching and research. And we have 18 who are teaching only academics. So that's about 50 academics in the department. We have 40 professional services staff, that is technicians and administrative staff. And we had, the last count, 69 postdoctoral researchers. So that is quite a large department now. Here are all the pictures of the academic staff and the senior staff. You may recognize some of them are here today. I also wanted to point out that we have also 2 members of staff, one of whom is here today, hi David, who are also part of running the university in academic positions. So David, who many of you will remember as a professor in the department, I see lots of nodding here. He is now the Pro-Vice Provost for UCL's doctoral school. He's in charge of all our PhD students, all our early careers staff, which you have done for a long time now.
20 years.
20 years. Yeah. And Paola, who a number of you will remember, and also who you would have met at UCL East earlier. Paola was instrumental in establishing UCL East, saw it through the entire building phase, and is now the Pro-Provost for UCL East. So we have departmental staff who are also working in quite important positions in terms of UCL. The senior management team, you will also remember some of these faces. We've now split the head role. There's one head, but then there are 4 slightly smaller heads who are helping running the department in different areas, because there is just too much to oversee. So we have one person focusing on research, on education, on enterprise, and on EDI. And Stefan, who's on enterprise, is the one who's put together today's program. We've also got Marc-Olivier, who was the head before me, who is now Vice Dean for Interdisciplinarity and Innovation for the faculty. Paola as the Pro-Provost, and we have Katie and Toby, who are heading up on the administrative side. In terms of students, I don't know if alumni remember how many students there were per cohort or when you were here, but we are now at 837. We have 555 undergraduates, 122 postgraduates, and 160 PhD students. When I started, we had less than 10 PhD students. I started at UCL in 1996, so I'm coming up to 28 years next week. In terms of that student population, 63% are international students, so we have a large proportion that are coming to us from overseas. The next number, 39.5, is a number I'm very proud of. We have now a very high proportion of female students, higher than the national average. The aim, obviously, is 50-50, so there is still a little bit of work to do that, but I think we're doing really well in this regard. In terms of degrees awarded, last year we awarded 196 degrees, undergraduates, MScs, as well as PhDs. I mentioned equality in terms of attracting female students. The department was last year recognised with something called an Athena Swan Award at gold level. Athena Swan Awards are given for higher education institutions and institutes that are promoting gender equality, particularly within STEM and medicine areas, but is now also looking at other areas. We were jointly with Imperial the first chemical engineering department to get an Athena Swan Award. That was in 2009, when we went straight into silver level. We renewed in 2012 and in 2017, and this time in May last year we got a gold award. Now that is something we're very proud of, because it shows that we are working tirelessly to ensure there is gender equality, that we've got the right policies in place, but that we're also living those policies. So this is quite a recognition. There are only 4 gold departments at UCL, which is more than any other university. Those other 3 areas are within the medical school and the sciences. And if you know the gender ratio in those departments, you will see that we had quite an uphill struggle to be able to get to this. So this is something we're very proud of. In terms of education, some of you may remember this board. We used to have it on the wall. We had 2 actually, that would list the Gibbs Memorial Prize winners for every year. They are somewhere, but they haven't been kept up to date the last 10 years. But I thought you might. I don't know whether anyone is actually on this board. Yeah. Yay! Well done. Well done. Excellent. That's very nice. So in terms of degrees that we are offering now, so we're offering obviously a BEng in chemical engineering, which you can also do with a top-up with a year in industry. We also have an MEng in chemical engineering. We have the normal MEng, but we also have MEng with biochemical engineering, or with chemistry, or with engineering mathematics, or with study abroad, and you can also do a year in industry option on top of those. We introduced the widths for chemistry and engineering mathematics only a couple of years ago, because we recognized there were a number of students who wanted to specialize in one particular area. So by offering these degrees, we are able to do that. And these are, of course, all accredited by the ICME, as Rob Best will attest for us that that is correct. Yes, confirmed. He heads up the accreditation for ICME. MSCs, some of you may remember we had an MSc in Chemical Process Engineering. This can also now be with a year in industry, which would make it 2 years. We started, this is 7 years ago, are they? 8 years ago. An MSc in Global Management on Natural Resources, which we are also working together with the University of South Australia, because our students go to Australia for their MSc dissertation over the summer. This program is accredited by IOM3. We've also started this year 3 new MSc programs that are running at UCL East: Advanced Propulsion, Digital Manufacturing of Advanced Materials, and Nature-Inspired Solutions. So we will have 5 MSc programs going forward as well. And we will be seeking accreditation for those as well once we've got them through the first year. In terms of our programs, some of you may know that the faculty introduced something called an integrated engineering program about 10 years ago. We really took a long, hard look at how we were teaching, and we decided that we wanted to change things a bit more and focus more on problem-based learning on real-world problems right from the very beginning. That you're not waiting until the design project in year 3 before you try to design something, but that you really incorporate that right from the beginning. So this is being hailed not by us, but by MIT as a world-leading research-based program based on scenario-based learning, evolved around real problems to educate our graduates. So we're focusing this on 4 different areas, challenges and scenarios, which are all problem-based. The students are giving a problem on Monday, they have to work in teams, and they have to submit the solution and present it on Friday. So it's a very hectic way of learning, but it's really introducing the students to some real problems and get them stuck in right from the very beginning. So we're focusing here obviously on the discipline, but also looking at a number of different areas. And in terms of our particular departmental focus on this, we are putting a lot of emphasis on experimentation to make sure that the students understand how things are working in practice. They understand where numbers come from and that there is something called uncertainty in numbers. We're focusing a lot on computation, that students are able to use the type of simulation tools that are being used in industry today, that they are aware of sustainability and that how that comes into every aspect of what we do as chemical engineers. With a strong focus on safety. If something is not safe, we will not do it. That they question, even if they can do something, should they do it? So, engineering ethics, and also professional skills in terms of our responsibility as engineers and how we should conduct ourselves. In terms of research, we will focus more on that later today. You will also see there are loads of posters outside where you can see some of the things we're doing. Just to say that we focus our work in 6 different themes now: catalysis and reaction engineering, electrochemical engineering, molecular and engineering thermodynamics, multi-phase systems, nature-inspired chemical engineering, and product and process systems engineering. In terms of the areas that we're tackling, we can sort of roughly put those under 4 different headings: advanced manufacturing, energy and sustainability, materials, and health. But more on this later. We have a number of industry partners who we're working with on that list. Those of you who are working in industry, I hope you see your name there. If it isn't, come and talk to us and we'll make sure that we can get you on that list. UCL East, you will have seen some of you earlier today. There we go. So this is the big building where we now have 2 large research areas. This is what this will look like, hopefully once we get to phase. So this building and this building is phase 1, and then there will be a phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4, we also hope. Those of you who are into football and want to know where it is, so West Ham United is just here. Yeah? So you can do everything in the same day. This will have about 4,000 students, mainly postgraduate students. Those who saw the labs will have seen, I'll show you the labs in a minute. There are about 10 key areas at UCL East that are focusing on different areas. We are particularly involved with the Advanced Propulsion Lab together with Mechanical Engineering, Manufacturing Futures Lab together with Mechanical Engineering, Biochemical Engineering and Chemistry. So the focus at East is very much that we're working across disciplinary boundaries, because only that way will we be able to solve the challenges that we're facing. Here's a picture of what it looks like inside and outside. It's a truly remarkable building. Those of you who are familiar with labs would be jealous if you saw all the, 64 fume cupboards I think we've got over there. It's really quite amazing. Centenary, we're all here because we're celebrating the centenary. We have a publication that we've put together that really showcases our history as well as where we are today, with some highlights of our research as well. We've put together a video, it's about 4 minutes, of where you can really follow this in pictures and live. The QR code up there is, if you put your phone up now, you will get straight to the website. We've put together a centenary timeline, a bit like what you saw outside here for the faculty, but we've got our own now on the 2nd floor. And we've also had a number of high-profile lectures within the research areas of the department, where we've had speakers so far from the US, from Australia, and from Europe. So all of that is part of what we have been doing this year to celebrate the 100 years. We're not going to stop partying because this summer the faculty is 150 years, and we will have what we call a Festival of Engineering, which will be running in July. This goes all the way from a reception at the House of Commons down to activities for primary school children. So we'll really focus the entire spectrum. And hopefully this will be another opportunity for you to come back and see what we're doing at faculty level. That is all I think that I wanted to say about where we are today. Do stay in touch. Shola's already told you that she will find you. We have got loads of news as well that we are reporting on social media. So if you follow social media, you'll be able to keep up with us there. I'll hand back to Stefan. If anyone have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Otherwise, you could come and ask during the coffee later. So I'll hand over to Stefan, who is our Deputy Head for Enterprise and who is the boss for today.
Thank you, Eva. Thanks for this wonderful introduction. So this is an alumni event, and we wanted to make sure that it is for our alumni, but also by our alumni. And so the next session on reflecting on 100 years of UCL Chemical Engineering will actually be led by some remarkable alumni. Before we introduce them, I want to briefly, show you our alumni community as a whole. So we've been looking through our data sets, and it appears that we have 3,671 alumni of UCL Chemical Engineering. As of today, you can see here the rapid growth of the size of the department is also reflected in the number of alumni per decade. But I personally think the best ratio of engagement is actually really from the 1950s, because I already have spoken to 4 alumni from that time. So it's not really that we're only engaging with the most recent ones. It's nice to see that today we have representation from seven decades, and actually we were we have alumni from 8 decades today, so from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000, 2001, and the 2020s. And I think that's quite remarkable that we managed to achieve so. So thank you very much for that. This is just a little stat on the contactability. So we have a very large email database, around 2,700 email addresses, but that's also the only way for us at the moment to engage with our alumni. So if you haven't seen some of your classmates today, it is likely that maybe we don't have their consent to have them contacted via email on our database. So reach out to them, and if so, then if they don't receive communication from us, they should contact us, and we'll be happy to add them to the list. As you can see, we have a large reach also well into the 1950s, but we'd love to have that going up to 100. Today, from those 3,000 odd alumni, I think we were quite delighted to see that a lot signed up. So today we have around 169 participants, and as you can see, we were able to reach out to all those decades from the 1950s all the way to the 2020s. Some of the year groups are more complete than others, but I think we have a nice spread. And what I also found very interesting is if you look through the job titles that people have submitted, you can see that many have been working in fields of chemical engineering. Others have moved onwards and became very successful in other fields. And so this is just a very a quick snapshot to demonstrate the diversity of occupations that our alumni have taken And it just shows how chemical engineering is quite a versatile degree that can provide you a good income and a meaningful career. Okay, so that's actually an important slide to me. As I said, we have some remarkably senior alumni, and those three here are, as far as I know, the most senior ones alive. So Fred Foster actually signed up to this event, but he had to cancel recently, saying that he was slightly too optimistic, making it all the way over here with 95 years old. Also, we have Ken Ridgway and Brinsley Sheridan, both of whom were filmed. So there are some interviews with them on our archives, and you're welcome to have a look at them at some other point. Also for them, but for many other alumni that are not able to join us today, we are now live streaming this event. And I just received a message from China saying that they're happy to see us online, which makes me quite relieved because I was worried it wouldn't work. So welcome everyone online on the globe. And I called up all three of them on Thursday to tell them that this is now possible with the live stream. And they're quite good with emails. So I sent them the email with the link, and I hope that all three of them are joining us today online. Okay, so as I said, academics like to talk, and they like to talk a lot about themselves and their research, but in this session we flip the coin and we let our alumni talk for themselves and talk about their time at UCL. And we thought that the most effective way of learning from their experiences is to engage with our current students. So I'm delighted that the Ramsey Society was very proactive in designing this session and planning this session. So may I now ask our 6 invited alumni, John Garside, Ajit Yonganathan, Penny Judd, Aman Sheikh, Darren Gobby, and Sami Taiwo on stage. And we'll have a little panel here, and then each of them will present for a few minutes, and afterwards the Ramsey Society will ask questions. So please come on stage. So we go by Yimish, John. There we go. Well, I mean, it's just the case, it's not about age. So I will start now with the presentations, and I think it's easier if I flip the slides. And I mean, I could also give you the clicker if you like, as you wish. Okay, so we're starting with Professor John Garside. He's now retired, but previously he was Principal and Vice Chancellor at UMIST and Professor of Chemical Engineering. Welcome, John.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. I was particularly pleased to see that the background to this is crystals. Those of you that know, that's where I work. I think it might be citric acid. Mannitol.
Is this? You want to use the microphone? Thank you. Yeah.
60 years, 64 years actually, since I joined the department as an undergraduate in 1960. That's a heck of a long time ago. So the mind gets rather fuzzy and you get various aspects of nostalgia when you begin to think what went on. But there were 18 of us. And if I recall correctly, 12 of us graduated. So it's a very different size department to the department that you have now. But if we could have the first slide, please. I was at UC as an undergraduate for those 3 years, and then I went straight on to do a PhD. And then I worked for ICI for 3 years up on Teesside, and then came back on the staff. So I was here a long time, actually, on and off. But it was a very different department as far as undergraduates were concerned. That's what strikes me. There was no UCAS to involve when you applied to an individual department, and I remember vividly being interviewed by a panel of, must have been almost all the academic staff in the department office of Donald, who was the head of department then, in the old department, which is over on the far corner of the campus. The first year was common to all engineers. So since you're going back to that in a bit now, but nothing was deemed particular for chemical engineers, except in addition to all the engineering, we had to do physical chemistry as well. And that was taught by John Barnard. He did physical chemistry. The second year was mostly chemistry. There was a lot of lab work. That big lab on the third floor was actually opened that year. In fact, I think the whole building was opened that year. The third year was chemical engineering at last. And we were joined by the diploma students who only got a diploma at that point. They didn't get a master's degree, but they joined us. They were people perhaps with chemistry or mechanical engineering degrees. And truth be told, it was a very old-fashioned course. And the big change came when Peter Rowe came in 1965 and immediately made very big changes in the nature of the course here. But the Amnesty Society was very active at that point. We had lots of works visits. The great social event of the year was the staff-student cricket match out at Shenley. And as soon as Alvin Nino joined the department, the staff always won. So have the next one, please. This is the student handbook for 1960-61. I still found it. It was extraordinary. And this group of people holding Phineas, who we'll come to in a minute, were stars of Doctor in the House, the film, much of which was filmed on the campus. And in the middle is Phineas. Does Phineas still exist? Phineas was the student mascot. And the subject of raids by students from King's. And in return, we used to raid King's to pinch, I think it was Lion, the lion. So it was a very undisciplined student body. The next one. Next slide, please. But just some thoughts about what UC was like in 1960, and this contrasts with some of the things that Eva said. At that stage, only about 6% of 18-year-olds went to university. Today, about 47% of the age group go on to higher education. And the extraordinary thing now is that 54% of university entry at undergraduate level are women. It's a very significant majority of women in universities, whereas in 1960, only about 25% of undergraduates were women. So as Eva was saying earlier, there have been enormous differences in that. I vividly remember bits of the college. Jeremy Bentham, who I went to see, Alice took me to see Jeremy Bentham this morning. Phineas, who was in the Union, the Slade Summer Exhibition, the Summer Ball, which was a great event. And my great joy outside chemical engineering was music. So I was in the choir. We had an annual opera, and the opera that year was called Halka, which was written by Manushko, and it really is the national opera of Poland. And this was apparently the first performance of Halka in this country. And we were joined by almost all the Polish community in London. It was absolutely wonderful. There was a very relaxed attitude to studies in some parts of the college. My then girlfriend, who's now my wife, was studying history. And so I met a lot of historians and English students. And it was said that the tutorials in the English department were held in the seminar room in the Marlborough. And it was said that the English department works on the principle, never schedule lectures on Wednesdays because it breaks into 2 weekends. Next one, please. And the 1960s was, of course, time of the swinging 60s in London in particular. And I've just put some things here that happened in the 1960s. It was a very, very political time to be a student. The Beatles were formed in 1960. Contraceptive pill was first introduced on the NHS, only to married women at that point. Lady Chatterley's lover was deemed not obscene, and there was a copy chained to the bar in the students' union, so read the appropriate bits. The Berlin Wall was built, Cuban Missile Crisis. I was an undergraduate then, and people really were very, very frightened at that stage that there could be a nuclear war as a result of that. Big student revolts in France, Prague Spring, and then the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia, and the first man on the moon. And the two big, I suppose, political events that did engage students so much was CND, Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, and marches associated with that. And throughout the 60s, the Vietnam War, of course. So it was a very different time. It was a very political time, if you chose to get involved in those sorts of issues. And it was a much more elitist time, I suppose, because so few of us from our age group were going through this sort of experience. And that's changed, of course, enormously over the decades since.
Thank you, John. So now we have Ajit Yoganathan from Georgia Tech. So we're actually really delighted to see a few of our alumni have come from very far, including Ajit. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan, and appreciate the invitation to come here 50 years after graduation. So if we can start with the first slide. Just would like to give some background to me. John covered some of the history of the 60s, which then overflowed into the 70s. So I was born in Colombo, Sri Lanka, which was called Ceylon at that time. It changed names around about the time I was graduating. Came from Royal College, Colombo, which was one of the primary education grounds for young men in Sri Lanka at that time. The way to come to I wanted to do, I liked chemistry and mathematics, and so the obvious field was chemical engineering. There was no chemical engineering at the engineering faculty in Ceylon at that time, so I looked to come to the UK. And so I did my London A-levels in March of 1970. It had to be done in India, so I went to Madras, India, which is now Chennai. I arrived in London in September 1973 during ongoing turmoil in the Middle East as we have it today, and I really remember that because so I was flying from Colombo to London, Heathrow, on British BOAC as it was called then, not British Airways, British Overseas Air Corporation. So they flew from Colombo to Cairo, Egypt. You had a refueling stop, and then you flew to London. However, 2 weeks before to get on the flight in the Middle East, there was a group called the Black September that had hijacked 2 planes in the Middle East and blown them up. So here we land in Cairo, and due to security reasons, you weren't allowed to get off the plane. You sat on the plane for 5 hours with no air conditioning, and then you came on. I came with 2 of my other classmates who went on to Cambridge to do their engineering tripos. I came on here. So I was at UCL from October 1970 to June 73. I stayed pretty much in this area, Commonwealth Hall in Cartwright Gardens, and across the street there was a hall called Bentham Hall. I don't think it exists anymore. I think it's been converted to a hotel. It was kind of old, rundown hall that was run by UCL. Commonwealth was the University of London Hall, and there were 2 others. There was Hughesbury, and there was another one where the female students lived. So that was the area that I lived in, and then my last year I did move to International Hall. So I'm very familiar with this area, which has changed tremendously. I'm afraid even to walk around because I've lost touch of the architecture or things. The only thing that is there that I remember vividly is Russell Square Tube Station with these huge elevators that you still have to use. Go on, next slide, please. Oh, can you go back? And because I had this long name, York Mountain, I was called York here. And then when I went on to the States and ran my research group, I was called Dr. Y, so I still go by that. If you go on the next slide, please. So demographics, there was approximately 35. A couple of them here in the room. Mike Knight is here. Yeah, so there was 5 or 7 of us from Commonwealth countries. The rest were all from the United Kingdom. 3 of us were from the Indian subcontinent, and I remember 2 from Malaysia and Singapore. So I'm not sure whether there's 5 of us or roughly 7. All male students, no females. There was a female student in the class above us and a female student in the class below us. All class sizes were around about 30, so there's maybe 90 to 100 total chemical engineering undergraduates. The other thing I remember was in our classes, in our 2nd and 3rd year, there were MS students who were doing the MS in biochemical engineering who sat in on some of our classes as well. Next slide, please. Put down some of the faculty that I remember, and I see that Stefan's kindly put photographs. Professor Rowe was head of department, and Professor Mullen, those were the 2 professors here. John Garside, who happened to be also became my tutor. So, but just to go back, I had lost contact with him, graduated in 73. There was no email. I went to the States, so I was not going to be writing letters. I totally lost contact with him. And then when I saw his post on the Centennial website, I got his email and we made contact and met last evening. So it's 50 years ago. Alvin Nino, who ran, as John mentioned, the cricket team for the staff and was very active. Dr. Yates, Burgess, Dr. Long, and Dr. Giublaro. Ms. Potter, or Mrs. Valerie Potter was the department secretary. That's what they were called those days. Now they would be called administrative manager. I remember Professor Rowe very well when I was leaving at the end of my stay here in June. I went to say goodbye to him. He said, "Have a seat," and pulled out his drawer and took out a bottle of single malt scotch. He knew that I liked scotch. The other person was Professor Mullen, who was a stickler for people being on time. And all the classrooms were in this fashion. The only entrance was that. And every now and then he would go lock the door. So if you were late, you wouldn't get into the classroom. But overall, we had a very fun-loving group of faculty that through the Ramses Society, we interacted. And that's one of my fondest memories of this place. That they would teach you, they would expect certain performance from you, but then you could socialize with them, which was great. Next slide, please. So these are things, like I said, the socials and faculty interactions, and I hope they seem to be going on still, which is great. Jeremy Bentham in the wheelchair. That is, man, the first time I went, what the hell is this guy doing here in this? And then there's this book about the godless children of Gower Street. And it's amazing just to have read that and learn the history of why UCL was created by Jeremy Bentham. And all of that is still a lasting memory that this university was built without any, would admit anyone, despite of religion, creed, ethnicity, anything like that. Those were his founding principles, and I'm glad to see that it still exists. Bell-bottom pants. So I have a couple of those that still exist, and I still. And the other day, I have an 18-year-old son, and I said, "These are coming back in fashion. Do you want them?" And he looked at me and said, "What the?" It was the hippie era. That was the time here, the late 60s, early 70s, and even when went to the States, it was still going on. The musicals that were very popular here, Hair and Jesus Christ Superstar. The music scene was Beatles, Rolling Stones, The Queen. Beer was only 5 to 10p, 5p in the halls of residence, and the halls of residence, bars could stay open after 11 p.m. on a weekend at the discretion of the warden. And then I also lived in International Hall, and which was across the street from Great Ormond Street Hospital, and I'll come back to that. Why did I put that up there? I'll come back to that. So overall, the 3 years here is probably the most enjoyable time in my life. It was hard work, but it was also a lot of fun, and I still like London as one of my favorite cities to come back to. Next slide, please. Found a picture of me with the hair, more hair, and then with the bell-bottom pants. Right. Didn't find many others. Next slide, please. So when I left, so during my time here, I did a 2-month stint at Shell Refinery in Stanlow here in between my second and third years. So got some exposure, worked on distillation columns, and did some real chemical engineering. I left in '73 to go to Caltech to do a PhD in chemical engineering, and this is where my pathway diverged from traditional chemical engineering at that time. I went there to do research in air pollution, because when I looked at what the faculty there were doing in chemical engineering, that was one major area. So I went there. When a faculty member there, they allowed the faculty to get up and talk about their research interests. One of the faculty members, Professor Bill Cochran, got up and talked about blood flow in the heart and the sounds it creates in your heart, which a doctor listens to with a stethoscope. I thought this was really fascinating because it was fluid mechanics applied to the human circulation. And I came from a family of doctors. My father and mother were both doctors, but I hated biology. But I thought this was really fascinating. And my career completely changed. And that's what I did for my PhD, looking at blood flow through the heart and heart valves, and I've continued to do that. Just in 1979, I went on to Georgia Tech as an assistant professor in chemical engineering, because at that time there were very few biomedical engineering departments in the United States, places like Johns Hopkins. Some of the private schools had it, so it wasn't a discipline that had been established. It was more a research area. And then in the late 1990s, Georgia Tech did create a department of biomedical engineering in 1997, and I was one of the founding faculty, of 2 faculty members that started that department. Today that department has over 70 faculty, and it's probably the most popular engineering discipline actually in all of the United States. Also has about 50 to 55% female students. It's probably, in chemical engineering in the United States, when I first went, it was about 30 to 35% of the classes that I taught, and I taught mass balance and heat balance, used to be a female, but this is the area. And so over the years, that was my research, looking at what I call cardiovascular engineering, the field. But the basic principle was using fluid mechanics that I learned as a chemical engineer and applying it to blood flow. Next slide, please. Okay. And so I used this slide because I remember once at an AICHE meeting, I got up and I presented my early graduate work, and someone in the back of the room got up and said, "What are you doing here? Where are you presenting this work?" And I find this slide to be very one that answers, and I tell a lot of people, my former students, people, look for opportunities that you're not, and sometimes things that you're not looking for, other ones that become more fulfilling, and I found that to be true even in the research areas I've got into over the years. Is that the last slide? No? Okay, so if you can go back, just go to the next. So in 2015, I was honored to be elected to the National Academy of Engineering. And the next slide, Stefan, please. This sort of gives you a synopsis of the areas of research I worked in. But the one that I'm probably most proud of, and the one that's been, and that's why I said Great Ormond Street Hospital, is an area that we worked in to work with children born with abnormal hearts. And you'd wonder how a chemical engineer, how can engineering help? Today, it's one of the areas that we use computational modeling to help this pediatric heart surgeon design his or her surgical options and look at things. So it is not artificial intelligence. It is using imaging data, computational fluid dynamics to look at different scenarios, and it's a piece of data that we provide the pediatric surgeon to take into consideration when they consider their options for particular type of surgeries. So again, overall, it's something that I've taken away from my days at UCL over 50 years ago and find it extremely rewarding. Thank you very much.
So next we have Penny John. Penny is a portfolio non-executive director in the city. And I have to say I'm really grateful for Penny to sign up today. Actually, this panel was slightly more, we had more female on the panel, but the others had to cancel, so thank you, Penny. But as you can see, our department now is run by female. We have female head of department, female departmental manager, so in that sense, we definitely have a lot of female decisions being made and to the good of the department now. Thank you.
Thank you. So I did sort of desperately try to say to Stefan, are you sure? Because as you'll see when we talk about things, I'm not much of a chemical engineer. However, I did graduate. I'm here representing the 1980s, and I think when I looked at Stefan's slide earlier, there's a fair number of people here who also graduated in the 1980s. So I'm representing the 80s, and I guess also representing the female. That slide is only supposed to come up really briefly. So we might move on from that one quite quickly, but Stefan did ask me if I could find some photos. And I didn't really, we clearly didn't take very many photos in the 80s, because if people remember, you had a little camera and you had about 12 pictures in your film, which you really saved because it was quite expensive, and it was quite expensive to get them developed. And then you took them to Boots, and then about 2 or 3 weeks later, you got your photos back. So we didn't really take loads and loads of photos. There were no digital photos. And you'd take a picture of the Eiffel Tower or something if you went to Paris, but you didn't really take photos of the department or you hanging around outside. So all I could come up with was random photos, which I thought represented the 80s quite well, because if, those of you from the 80s, New Romantics, the Blitz, the Camden Ballet, Spandau Ballet, and hairstyles. So you can go back really briefly. That is a selection. That is a selection of my hairstyles from the 1980s, of which I'm quite proud, and a couple of cats. Right, we can move on now. So yeah, my memories of UCL and chemical engineering are a little hazy, possibly because of the aforementioned clubs. And why UCL and why chemical engineering? Well, I grew up in Bristol in a fairly non-academic family, actually. I was the first member of my family to go to university, so there was no sort of precedent in terms of subjects or what sort of things you would go and do. And somebody came along to our school and did a talk. So I'm glad to hear that people are still going out talking to schools to persuade people to come and do engineering, particularly women. So someone came to talk to our girls' school, and he was a chemical engineer, and he seemed to have a really good job, and he had a swimming pool. So entirely on that basis, I think I decided I wanted to do chemical engineering. And then I applied to various places, including Imperial. I was talking to some people earlier. We all applied to Imperial as our first choice, because Imperial was where you applied to do engineering, I was told. UCL, was my second choice. Manchester, I think, was there, and Loughborough. Anyway, there was a few random choices. However, when we went and visited all of these places, I didn't like Imperial. It just didn't click. Whereas UCL just seemed much more rounded and much more welcoming. And so I went for the offer from UCL, and I'm very glad I did. So remembering, I guess, the 1980s here. Yeah, 80s London, lots of clubs, wonderful music. I'm sure the 60s and 70s were great for music too, but the 80s is definitely the best. No internet, obviously, no photos. Not really any computers. Again, we were chatting earlier. One of our modules, we did get to use a computer, and we used Fortran as the language, and we put together this big bunch of punch cards, which you carefully wrapped up and handed to somebody. And then it went into this amazing machine which whirred away for days and then gave you back a sort of roll of paper, which may or may not have been relevant to what you thought you'd asked it in the first place. But that was as far as computing went. I stayed in Ramsey Halls, lucky enough to stay there, just off Tottenham Court Road. Again, fabulous place to live, amazing. Lots of time spent in the Students' Union bar and the engineering bar as well, obviously. We were quite diverse, I think. I was trying to remember how many people were in our cohort, and I mean, in my head it's around 60. And I think there were probably 4 or 5 women, maybe. So some, but definitely not 50-50. We were, however, I think, quite diverse in terms of where we'd all come from and backgrounds. We had quite a lot of international students, and again, sort of socially, it wasn't an elite thing, I don't think, anymore so much in the 80s. We had grants, we could come to university. So I think that had changed and moved on a bit. So despite, I can't give you too many memories of the labs or the modules, but I did obviously remember something because I did manage to scrape myself a 2-1. Probably, I think, of my cohort, about half of us went in sort of straight into engineering roles, but quite a lot went on to do different things. I personally went and joined an accounting firm, and quite a number of my year did at the time. I did want to go into engineering, but there were not many engineering jobs. There were a lot of accountancy jobs. So, always being one to take the easy route, I took one of those and went on to become an accountant. And quite a few of us did. And some people went into teaching, people went into quite a variety of different roles, actually. And if you flick it on, I think, what was going on in the 80s? Quite a lot. The space shuttle, for carrying on the space theme. The internet did appear during the 1980s, not early enough, unfortunately, to be of much use for our degrees, but it did appear later on. There were quite a lot of wars. And the ones I particularly remember are Iran, Iraq and Falklands. Both of those were when I was actually here studying. And actually I had quite an impact because some of our students were from Iran and Iraq, and some of them chose to go back. So that was really quite a big thing, and it did impact me at the time. We had Thatcher and Reagan and indeed Gorbachev, as you can see there. It was, again, quite political. Quite a time of turmoil. We had the Brixton riots, or in my case, the St Paul's riots, because I grew up in Bristol. The miners' strike, and then on the more positive side, I guess we had Live Aid, the wonderful Live Aid, the Berlin Wall, which had gone up during our previous speakers' times, came back down again, and right at the end, things like Tiananmen Square. So quite a decade, I guess, of social change. So what did I go on to do afterwards? I definitely am the one that got away. So I had a vague idea, I think, of becoming an accountant, and then I was going to become finance director of Shell or BP or something like that, and have some connection to chemical engineering. Didn't quite get there, although I did audit ICI at one point. That's the nearest I got. So qualified as a chartered accountant, ended up at the London Stock Exchange, worked for them for nearly 10 years, and then my career really has been very much in corporate finance, investment banking, and now I am a non-executive director, so I sit on the board of a variety of different listed companies, chair some of them, chair the audit committee for some others. So quite a different path. But I think the skills I learnt when I was here and that sort of logical thinking, some level of numeracy, and it's also an impressive degree. I think one of the questions later is about sort of differentiation. People don't necessarily expect me to have a chemical engineering degree. They think I'll be a lawyer or something like that. And it's always been A, a point of conversation, and B, something that is impressing people. So it's definitely been a good thing to have on the CV when I've been moving into different roles. So it's been certainly helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much, Penny. And it continues to be like that many of our students actually strive for a career in the city. And so in that sense, you are a role model, even if you moved away from chemical engineering. So that's completely okay. So now we have Ahmad Sheikh, who also came all the way from the US to be with us today. So thanks for that. He's now the global head and at AbbVie doing molecular profiling and drug delivery. So welcome.
Thank you. So the first thing I want to say is I did not know how difficult it was to speak about my experiences at UCL as an AbbVie employee. So the slides that I originally prepared had to be sifted for copyright violations, for intellectual property, imaging rights, and everything else. So it's much easier for me to talk about the research we do, but it's very difficult for me to talk about anything else as an AbbVie employee. So unfortunately, my slides are a little sparse on pictures, but there are some really beautiful samples of handwriting from our professors at the time. So with that, and again, this is a slide that we had to prepare for something else, and this is the only slide I can share about myself. So again, the formatting is very, very restricted in terms of what I can say. So since I disappeared from the radar of UCL for almost 2 decades, so let's talk a little bit about myself. So my wife thinks I'm now a semi-decent husband. That's a huge compliment, and I think a lot of maturity has come to arrive at that point. My kids think I'm a goofy dad. My dad has dementia, so he still thinks I'm a caring son, so that means a lot to me. And I have 3 other siblings, so they still find me occasionally useful. I vividly remember this conversation with Professor Jones. So I used to be a pretty obnoxious student, to put it mildly, and halfway through my PhD, I went to his office and said, I want to go to the US. Actually, I want to go to Caltech. And I had been admitted into Michigan, and he said, hey, sometimes you have to look down. Keep your feet firmly on the ground, and you might even graduate in a year or so instead of starting it over. So since Alan is not with us, that quote has stuck with me for the longest period of time. What inspires me is to make a difference, and being from the lineage of Professor Mullin, I am a stickler for time, and nothing winds me up more than people in my team showing up more than 30 seconds late. 30 seconds late. And one of the things I learned from living in halls of residence here is 6:30 dinner. So as you can see, I am there with my family at a nice seafood restaurant in Chicago, and every other table is empty because it's only 6 o'clock. So before arriving at AbbVie, and again, thanks to Dr. Bogle over there, there's a story there as to how I ended up in the US. We are going to keep it for some other day. I started my career at G.D. Searle & Company, then ended up at Pharmacia, Pfizer, Abbott, and finally AbbVie. The good thing about that is I changed companies 5 times, but I actually stayed in the same space. That's a sharp contrast from my early life. I was born in Pakistan. When I was 2 years old, we moved to Somalia, and then I grew up in Saudi Arabia from age 4 to 18, and like many others, arrived here in the middle of war. So first Gulf War was going on, and bombs were falling near where my parents were. And then eventually started in Leeds with my A-levels, ended up here at UCL, UCL was my first choice, but I still remember coming here to interview for my visit and totally petrified talking to Professor Yates. And he asked me, why did I want to be a chemical engineer? And I said, well, I grew up in Saudi Arabia. All I see was oil refineries. And my dad is a physicist. I don't have enough money to go to med school. So it's a very simple decision to do chemical engineering. And that still stuck. The honesty still stuck, and I got it. What do I do at AbbVie? Again, I'm not going to bore you with that. It's a pretty diverse team. My hours are really long. I have a team in California, a team in Germany, and through this wonderful mix of talent that we have, we try and bring new drugs to market, and with that, we leave it for now. Next slide, please. So here are some things I could include from my time at UCL. So first and foremost, again, I learned today that Professor Burgess is no longer with us, so I have this wonderful picture from the first lecture notes with his beautiful handwriting. And my handwriting, which you will see later, is actually quite bad. So when I came here, I used to be amazed by the penmanship of our professors. And then I was also fortunate enough to be the first guinea pig for Asterios' chemical reaction engineering class. So here are the notes from the first ever chemical reaction engineering class that was taught by him. And one thing I do remember, which I could not find on many other notes, was contact time hours and how frequent they were compared to some other professors. So maybe this is one of the tricks he learned in the US and before he came here. And obviously, I'm not going to ask anyone to spot me or anyone else here. We all look very different back then. Next slide, please. Professor David Bogle and Alan Jones have had a lot to do with my career. So for me, 1990s were all about particles and computers. And so here is the snapshot of the particulate systems course that Alan Jones and Professor Yates used to teach. And I can still see pharmaceuticals, and next to it, it says rapid dispersion or dissolution. And believe it or not, 28 years later, I'm still solving dispersion and dissolution problems. So some things never change. I also want to highlight how far we have come, David, in computer-aided process engineering. We used to talk about spreadsheets. We used to talk about numerical methods, and the advanced project used to be about Fortran. And I think this is your handwriting from 1992, even better than Professor Burgess's. And the history of computing used to start in 1642 with Pascal, and used to end up with Intel 386 32 bits. Then I say again, just to remember Alan, I found some handwriting on a piece of paper. So it says, Ahmad, if you're interested in going to this course, David Bogle may be able to get you a place. Please let him know as soon as possible. So thanks to that, I ended up with spending 3 weeks in Denmark and learned a whole lot of complex advanced process simulations. And just to make the point that at UCL, we are usually always ahead of time, here is the title of the talk I gave in 1996 at an AICAG conference in Frigid, Chicago. And machine learning was in the title of that. So I do remind some of my younger colleagues that, we were doing machine learning in the last century. One other thing about Chicago that I remember from 1996 was that it was extremely frigid, maybe -10, -15 degrees Fahrenheit. And I was a poor student from London. I couldn't afford to live in Hilton, in Palmer House Hilton. So a friend of mine used to pick me up from the corner of Marshall Fields, and I'd sleep with him. And we did not have phones, and we did not have pagers, so there would be a time. You go stand there at 5 o'clock, and because of traffic, you would never be on time. And I used to freeze every day and said, never, ever again am I ever coming to this godforsaken place ever again in my life. Fate would have it otherwise. 1 year later, and I moved to Chicago and have been there since. So with that, we can go to the next slide. So what some of the key life long learnings. stop making sloppy mistakes. So I got 2 Ds in my transcript. Both were because of some sloppy mistakes. So one was in thermodynamics. I hope Harun is not here. I got a first D in my degree. And what I had done was I had booked a flight to go back home to Saudi Arabia 4 hours after the exam was supposed to finish without realizing how long it would take from me to go from UCL to Heathrow. So I'm 1/3 done with the exam and I realize, oopsie, I need to leave now if I'm going to catch the plane. Or I'll have to come up with a really bad explanation with my dad, and since he was paying for everything, that was not an option. So I bite my bullet, take a D and move on, and I think Harun and I stopped talking after that for the next 2 years because he really did not anticipate me getting a D. And then the other D was in this class where it was a 3rd-year class, and I think we needed a financial calculator for that, and I forgot to take my calculator with me. And the third one was around PhD exam. David, we are not going to go into that, but there was a sign in one equation in one of the chapters that I had copied from somewhere that I got wrong, and after 4 hours of grilling by my counselor, I failed the thesis because two chapters were impacted by that. So the first thing I've learned is not to make any sloppy mistakes. The second thing is 26 years on, London still feels like home. I walked around, everything came back, Connaught Hall where I stayed, went to Schaefer House last night, 127 Gower Street that I lived on, so still feels like home, only if I could get my family to like room size of their closets, that's still a big issue. So something that I learned here, freedom and responsibility, the relationship between those, independent thinking and confidence in being different, that has served me really well over the years. Questioning and challenging authority goes on nicely, at least in the US. And then thinking like an engineer, executing like a scientist. So I think I may get a question on that, so I'll leave it for that. I'll leave commentary on that for later. So again, thank you so much for the opportunity to come back.
Thank you, Ahmad. So now we're moving to the 2000s with Darren Gobby. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you very much. I was a bit worried actually being in the 1990s. Coming in at 2000 makes me feel just a little bit younger. So thank you, Stefan. Great. Can we just move on to the next slide? So I started at UCL in 1993, and I wasn't originally going to do chemical engineering. Back in 1992, in the sixth form, before the internet, well, I think the internet was still around, they gave us this sheet of paper with a load of questions on it, and we would fill it in with a pencil. It would get sent away, and it would come back with some career options that we could actually do. And at that point, I was just assumed I was going to do chemistry because I enjoyed chemistry. And this thing cropped up called chemical engineering, which looked just a little bit interesting. So I did a bit of research about this, and the IChemE at that point were really helpful. And I seem to remember that one of the things on the IChemE literature was actually how much chemical engineers got paid. Now that wasn't the reason for actually doing this, but it became so, oh, maybe I'll go into chemical engineering. And I applied to a few universities, and 2 London ones came up. There was some place a few stops down the Piccadilly line, but there was also UCL as well. And I came to UCL, and as soon as I came here, I knew this was a place I wanted to pick. The person that interviewed me was over there, was David Bogle. And I remember being toured around and what a friendly place the department felt. I remember going down to the labs as this young 18-year-old in a suit, which I probably looked quite terrible actually, but yeah, I remember meeting Bloomfield at the time, and it was like, well, London was where I actually wanted to be. I remember starting in 1993, and I thought, what was I doing here? I remember I think we must have been in this physical space, because this used to be the Fleming Theatre, and I think it was twice as high. Sat there in engineering mathematics, the first one, and just thought, what is this? I was sat there with some very intelligent people, but I persevered. And one of the things I did do in that first year, I have a slight fear of heights. And I remember going to the Freshers' Fair, and I enrolled in the gliding club. I think it might have been a bet in the UCL union that I couldn't do this. And that started an interest in aviation that is still there today. So they took us to the UCL's own glider, and they took us to the London Gliding Club, which was in Dunstable, of all places. And that stayed with me. So that's one of the non-technical things that is taken away from UCL. And I've got a couple of pictures here. This is from the UCL Student Union and Frank Norton Sports Day. Some people you may recognise. Mike, where are you? Mike Files? Yep, there. So he's just here. There's a few of us. And I don't think I've been in the UCL Union for probably many years now. But at that point, I did okay in my first year. The second year was a little bit of a downer. And I remember at the end of the second year in 1995, again, David Bogle hauled me up saying, I think you can do better than this. And at that point, I started a research project in my third year where I developed an interest in mathematical modelling. And as part of that, David arranged for us to go to Switzerland, to Hoffmann-la-Roche, on a vitamin C production plant. And David, just to embarrass you, I actually managed to dig out this photograph of you. It was just, yeah, I wasn't going to make that comment, but I'm glad you've actually done that. And that was great. I mean, the problem was I focused so much on that research project. Again, I could have done a little bit better on the more other parts of that as well, of the course. But that was quite instrumental, because at that point I felt like I wanted a career in process development. Came away some very unique skills. I think the package we were using at the time, David, was Speed Up, and we're still using the evolution of that now in my research group. Next slide, please. So what happened in 1996? I kept on, and I started to focus a little bit more. In the summer of '96, I was able to continue that third year research project, and I think it was called Undergraduate Research Opportunities in Chemical Engineering. And it was a small grant that allowed me to carry on that work. And I got myself a part-time job in London as well, one of the more unusual jobs. I'll tell you more about that at the Ramsey dinner. And yeah, I really developed an interest. That summer in '96 was great. It was Euro '96. It was my first summer staying in London. And, you know, with a bit of light mathematical modelling, that was a good summer. In my fourth year, I moved on to a different area of modelling. That was with Tim Elson. Some really important skills there. Again, those skills still key today. We still use CFD in our research group. And I remember the lectures by Tony Burgess, Professor Yates, the Gibillara at the time on fluidization. So really learnt some unique skills there, which are still relevant in industry today. It wasn't until autumn 1996 I decided to do postgraduate study, a PhD. When I came here in '93, I had no ambition to go and do a postgrad. I just assumed I was going to go into industry. But at the same time, I carried on the work from my third year research project, which ultimately ended up giving my first international presentation, Escape 7, I think it was, in 1997. So technically, I was still an undergraduate. I look back at it now and thinking, oh, this is quite interesting, but not bad as an undergraduate. Next slide, please. So, from 1997 onwards, Asteros convinced me to do a PhD in reaction engineering. And that was great. We went to a conference in New Orleans. Things were starting to come together. But I think in my second year, I think I must have gone through the second year PhD blues, where things weren't going quite right, results weren't getting there. And it was Alan Jones, a bit again like yourself, he was a real, I didn't know him that well at that point, but he was a real sort of comforting person at that time, saying, look, this happens. Keep your feet on the ground and you will get there. And I do remember that interview very, very well. And then Asteros has also informed me, apparently I'm his most cited paper. Is that still the case? Great, okay. I can't remember what it was, but apparently it's the most cited one. But we came away with the PhD with a lot of knowledge, and not just technical, it's also about the way you approach problems. And so for that, I'm very grateful that we actually, I did do a PhD. The photograph to the right I think you can probably just make out that's me, and for those of you old enough in the department, the one in the middle is Nick Willoughby, and the one to the left, who I believe was very instrumental in the integrated engineering program, was John Mitchell. Next slide, please. So after the PhD, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew it was something in chemical engineering, you would hope so, having just done an MEng and a PhD in it. But I didn't want to stay in academia, so I sort of went to a halfway house, which was AEA Technology at the time, which is a bit of a spin-off from the United Kingdom Atomic Energy Authority. Spent a couple of years there in numerical analysis group doing more mathematical modelling. Then the big break came in 2003, when I was very privileged to be part of a project with one of the ex-ICI companies, where we are able to see a program right the way through from a test tube right the way through to a full-scale plant, really taking on board all those skills, the scale-up, the design rules we learned at UCL, all the mathematical modelling that we learned, and actually to see it into a full-scale plant out in Singapore in 2008. I think when you actually see, that's one of the photographs there, when you see it being winched into position, you think, well, I designed this. But you also think it's too late to change it now. So I can tell you it's very expensive to go and retrofit a chemical plant because we learned about distillation from Mr. Norton and all that sort of thing. I remember him saying in one of the first year lectures, you don't just walk up the column and just chuck the packing in. There's a little bit more to it than that. And what I will say, when columns start to get to about 6 meters, it gets difficult. When they get to about 8 meters diameter, you've got to start knocking buildings down to actually get them to site. So you really want to make sure you get this right. So in 2006, I almost had a career change. I spoke to you about what I learned, started gliding in 1993. I continued that, went into powered flying, and almost had the opportunity to become an airline pilot in 2006. But for some reason, I decided to stay in chemical engineering process development. It might have also been to the fact I had a mortgage and a family as well, so that was one of the things. But I'm kind of glad that I didn't do that. Some presents are best left unwrapped. I joined Invista Coke Industries in 2011, their licensing part, and in 2013, I was stuck in the airport at Heathrow getting thoroughly miserable about travelling all the time. And I got a phone call, and it said, would you like to join Johnson Matthey on a bio project, which I did. Which immediately resulted in more travel across the Atlantic again, so I didn't sort of get the travelling hours down. But I became principal engineer in 2013. I led a large research group from 2019, our corporate R&D division, and then as of the 1st of December this year, I've become technology development manager, looking at the route to net zero, really trying to make sure that we sort of get some of these ideas over the line. Next slide, please. So what does the future look like? There's a couple of images here. We often think about petrochemical plants, but we're seeing things evolve now, much more into the manufacturing side, into the formulation. So we're looking here at making sort of catalyst-coated membranes for fuel cells, electrolyzers, real precision engineering where the formulation as well as the composition is very, very important. And those tolerances are very, very tight. But we don't forget the past. Bottom left-hand corner, we've still got a stirred tank. The fluid is complex, the components are very expensive, but we still end up putting an impeller in a baffled vessel. And then to sort of continue the aviation theme, we're moving from the end-use applications now, where we're looking at sustainable aviation fuels, really looking at those markets where we can make a difference and drive down our emissions. And at that point, I'll stop.
So I guess you realize that we're running a little bit late. I think we're having a good time. That's the most important thing. And we're now closing this session with Dami Taylor, the most recent graduate, and he representing the 2010s. So welcome.
Thank you, Stefan, and thanks to the department for the invite to be able to share my experience here at UCL. So yes, just a bit about myself. So I was born and raised in Lagos, Nigeria. Back in secondary school, I remember just being amazed with chemistry and maths. I loved maths and chemistry, and even before that, my dad knew I was good in the science subjects and was like, yeah, you're going to be a medical doctor. Yeah, I think that's what you want to do. And I remember, I think this was the penultimate year of secondary school. I remember thinking, right, okay, I've taken an interest in math and chemistry. I'm doing really well at it. And I've taken interest in engineering drawing later on. I think chemical engineering is probably the way to go. Still remember having that conversation with my dad, breaking the news, like, oh, by the way, I'm going to go chemical engineering. I was expecting him to be a bit like, I was like, okay, that's good, you've chosen that, and yeah, we'll support you with it. And I remember enrolling to University of Lagos's chemical engineering program. Had its ups and downs. It was great. I finished with 2-1, and I was really happy with myself. And thought, I see myself following on in chemical engineering, going into a process industry. I did a placement at Coca-Cola after in 2010 when I graduated. Worked in the CO2 plant, a production plant, quality control as well. So I thought, yeah, I'll probably go into manufacturing or maybe oil and gas. And then after doing the placement, I thought, I probably should go on for a master's, improve my knowledge on chemical process. So I remember applying to UCL, Lancaster, and Manchester. I remember my Lancaster admission came through first, and I thought, yeah, maybe that's where I'll go. And then the UCL one came through. And I vividly remember Pat Markey's emails. Like, she was very welcoming, comforting, making sure I was on top of everything in terms of documentation-wise for my admissions. And I thought, this is a good sign. This is a good rapport I'm building here. Maybe this is the way to go. And I remember just saying, yeah, UCL. I looked at the rankings again. I was like, yeah, UCL is definitely doing better. And so I'll go for UCL. So I joined in 2011, moved to the UK, big change, moving away from family, and enrolled to the chemical process engineering program. Did that, finished in 2012, summer, and I remember I made a distinction in the program. I was quite happy, all the hard work paid off, and I remember being offered an opportunity to do a PhD shortly after, even just before my Viva actually. We did 2 Vivas, an internal one and an external one. I remember being offered an opportunity after the internal one. I was like, this is actually something I think I'll do. I enjoyed my research project. So fast forward from 2012, did my PhD, finished in 2017, still see lots of familiar faces from that time, and went on to do a postdoc at Imperial College, rivals, and did that for about 18 months, and thought, yeah, I think I'm going to go into industry and make a bit of money. And then in 2019, I got contacted by Cummings, which is now also accelerated by Cummings, a subset of one of the business segments of Cummings. And I was hired to work in the e-mobility division as a senior electrochemistry scientist. And I've been there since, and enjoying my time there. So next slide, I'll sort of break down my different experiences in the programs I was in. So I remember during the MSc program, I lived in Ian Baker House, which is within the center of Ramsey Halls on Maple Street, for I think from the September 2011 down to about summer after exams or end of spring, and then moved into Astor College, which is quite nice. I remember during the program spending a few long nights with G-Proms. Eva was very, very passionate about G-Proms, and I remember I was quite a beginner to programming and coding, and a lot of us in the year were. So I remember spending long nights in science library, sort of putting heads together, getting our tray equations to work, and then from the trays get to the column, get the mass balance right, and then when you think you're making progress, you've got some syntax error popping up. You're like, But yeah, I'm glad we were able to make it through that. I remember with David Bogle, Professor Vivek, and Professor Lazarus, Advanced Process Engineering. That was really good module as well. I did my MSc dissertation with George Manos. I don't believe he's around here today, but probably online. I really enjoyed working with George. George gave me, for my undergrad, the dissertation we did, there was a bit of wiggle room. You could make a few free decisions in your thesis, but George gave me an amazing amount of freedom and independence to work on it. And I think my love for research started to grow because I could take whatever route I wanted with his guidance. So I did a thesis on plastic waste pyrolysis process design, trying to integrate a smaller pyrolysis process into an existing refining process, do a technical economic analysis about it, and around that time, after the main course exams, the London Summer Olympics were going on, so there was lots of distractions in London. I remember the pink flags being everywhere. All my colleagues were saying, "Oh, we're going to book tickets to go to again." I was like, oh. And then I so happened to sign up to a project management professional certification course, so I had like so much to juggle at the same time. And I remember being in Astor College with my laptop, splitting the screen into having two windows. One window was watching the Olympic Games, the other was writing my thesis. So yeah, that was quite a fun time. But I had an amazing cohort of friends, made a really nice community. I think there was about 19 of us in the MSc program, but we made lots of friends in the MNG program as well. And there's a couple of photos of us on the far right, top and bottom. So it's good memories in the department. MSc was great. Next slide. So, as I said, towards the end of my master's, I was offered an opportunity to do a PhD in the Electrochemical Innovation Lab in the basement. I remember my first interaction with Professor Paul Schering, who was my PhD supervisor. I remember he brought his Mac. He was an Apple fan. He had his MacBook. He had his Apple screen, his keyboard. I remember him just flicking it. Well, he was in his office, flicking the screen around, showing me 3D renderings of microstructure of a lithium battery electrode. So fancy fly-through videos. Like, yeah, this is what you could do. This is an amazing field. There's so much untapped potential in here. And I was like, yeah, this looks great. And I think what particularly drew me to accepting that PhD offer was there was one module, Energy Systems and Sustainability, which was covering a lot of renewable energy systems, fuel cells, batteries, electrolyzers. And it was relatively new territory for me back then, and I really enjoyed that module. And I think that sort of helped me make that decision to go in that direction. Fortunately, that PhD came fully funded as an international student, which was very rare. So I'm really grateful for that opportunity. It was funded by UCL and EPSRC together. So that was something I will never forget and always be grateful for. Whilst in the EIL and the Electrochemical Innovation Lab, it was a really big lab, lots of PhD students, some ex-members and current members are in the group and in the crowd here. And I remember that the first couple of years they came up with a outreach team called UCL. It was sort of like UCL fuel cell. So basically what we did was we'd do engineering outreach activities to schools, we go to festivals, and we had this hybrid fuel cell battery stack. We'd take in parallel with some of the events we went to. We had demo kits as well to engage from school students to adults at festivals who were just keen to see what the next best thing in science was. So it was quite rewarding. I got to places I never dreamed of going to just on my own. I never thought I'd go to Glastonbury Festival. I went to Green Man Festival in Wales. We got free tickets to go there because one of the merchants there had a stand and he wanted to showcase some renewable energy. He had solar panels on his roof, and I thought, yeah, your fuel cell stack would be nice next to our stand. So it was really good time. That's the UCL team. The top two photos. Some of the ex-members of the UCL team, which was quite nice. It was a good distraction from the PhD research. Every so often, we had events to do, so it was nice break from work to sort of de-stress and not think about work for a bit. The chairs events were quite fun as well. The Engineering Researcher Society within the department, it was a good forum to get PhD students, postdocs to sort of mingle, have events, especially the summer barbecues as well were quite nice and fun. I have fond memories of those. I enjoyed my research so much. My research was focused on lithium-ion battery degradation and using X-ray tomography to try and investigate how batteries age over time. And I really enjoyed it. And Professor Paul Schering really helped me basically open my eyes, expose his network to me as well. And I really was able to enjoy collaborating with people, got out lots of presentations and publications out of that. Went to lots of conferences, went to the US, to Phoenix, went to Lund to collaborate with people, went to Delft University, and yeah, I really had a good time traveling and working with lots of people and building my own network as well. At the department, I also met my best friend and my now wife, Falashade. You can sort of see a photo of us. We graduated together. I must also say, Stefan was also one of my Viva examiners of my PhD, so thanks for passing me. And yeah, I also won a David Newton Award in 2018, I believe, yeah, for my dissertation as well. So it's quite a nice experience and fun memory. You see, there's a photo, second row on the far right, with me and Paul sharing at Ramsey dinner when the award was given. And yeah, just built a big community from my time being here at UCL. It's quite good. Yeah, so next slide, please. So some lessons I learned. I think I learned that saying yes and trying new things is a good thing. Initially I was mostly an introvert. I didn't really want to get involved into things I wasn't too comfortable with, but being in a big group that always supported you and encouraged you to do stuff, and having good supervisors as well who nurtured that ability to try new things and build my confidence was good. Having a work-life balance, I learned, was very, very important. UCL was very good in helping me understand that, being part of UCL. And I also learned you can never do it on your own. I remember trying to use MATLAB to do a lot of image processing in my PhD, and lots of other senior PhD students and even postdocs in the group knew MATLAB, and I thought, yeah, just go hover over to their desks and ask a few questions, have a chat, and surprisingly, people were always eager and keen to help, and I learned a lot from a lot of people. It was quite a nice experience. So yeah, that was me in a nutshell.
Thank you, Dami. I have to say I have a absolutely terrible reputation as a PhD examiner. But Dami couldn't know because I only started back then. But he did extremely well, so yeah, he definitely deserves his PhD. Okay, so we started late. We're now even more late. But I think it was a very good use of our time. Thanks for all the invited speakers for sharing their memories. We have asked the students to come up with a few questions. So the Ramsey Society is here represented. And I would say let's continue the session for another 10 minutes or so with a handful of selected questions. And then we'll have coffee for 15 minutes and then come back at 3:15. So I hand over the microphone now.
Imperial was also my first choice, and I also got rejected. Engineering mathematics has not gotten any easier, and GProms has also been quite a challenge for us. So I guess something's never really changed. So we're gonna ask just one question since we're quite short on time. So first of all, Professor John Garside. How was teaching in chemical engineering from being a student at UCL to the... Oh, sorry, hold on. Sorry, how has teaching in chemical engineering changed since you were a student to now? And what progress do you think is still need to be made?
Another half hour.
It's a very simple question.
It's difficult to answer because it's a long time since I've been involved in teaching anything. But I think it's probably related to the nature of what is taught in a chemical engineering course. And that's reflected in many ways by what background the staff in a chemical engineering department, what skills they have. But when I was teaching early on in my early parts of my career, we were all effectively chemical engineers. Well, there was the odd chemist, and if there was maths, it was taught by somebody from the maths department. The nature of chemical engineering has changed, it seems to me, enormously. And I think that means, on the one hand, the people that are teaching have very different backgrounds, a much more diverse background than they had when I was involved. They come from different disciplines. And what they are probably trying to do in the teaching is actually find ways of melding those different backgrounds together so that students in chemical engineering probably don't recognise a single discipline anymore, or don't recognise a traditional discipline anymore, but recognise something that we continue to call chemical engineering, but actually is a meld of a much more disciplines, not just physics and chemistry as it probably was when I studied it. I don't know whether that helps or whether it makes sense, but
I think it made sense, yes.
So my next question is to Professor Ajit. You mentioned about your fascinations with hearts and how you transitioned from the field of chemical engineering to biomedical because of that. What sort of knowledge or skill that you carried from chemical engineering into this relatively new field at that time?
I would say the fundamental aspect of what I took was fluid mechanics. And fluid mechanics is in chemical engineering, and keep in mind two-phase flow that you look at as blood flow is two-phase, and there's 45% cells. And so that kind of knowledge is what took me across. And if you look back at my generation of faculty who got into biomedical engineering research, there's a number of us who came from chemical engineering undergraduate degrees, and it is. And to me, you answer some of your question, what is it that education? I think chemical engineering gives us some analytical skills, gives us the chemistry background. We didn't have the biology then, but I think today a lot of chemical engineering programs do teach, or you take some biology. So I think out of all the engineering disciplines, I still think, and maybe obviously I'm biased, I think chemical engineering probably gives you a lot of skills. Also see that chemical engineers go into other things, finance, consulting, all of that, but I think that's the one thing that I took away was the basic background that I had really helped me in that space.
Thank you.
So our next question is for Penny Ju. So as you know, you are the only female on this panel, so it's going to be a question about that. Engineering today is still quite male dominant, even though in chemical engineering we do like have more females, maybe even biomedical and biochemical as well. But what do you think was a challenge that you faced as a woman in the 80s studying engineering, if there was any?
Yeah, I don't feel like I didn't feel as if I had any particular challenges as a woman studying engineering. I didn't feel that I was ever treated any differently to anyone else. And I think sometimes the reason it's really important to carry on with the outreach, etc., and have role models in engineering, is that I think some of the barriers maybe we put up ourselves. If we don't see people, we don't do it. So I think you just need to be open to trying things, and if you go and try, the likelihood is that people will react well to you and it will be successful. So I think some of those barriers are our own. But having said that, it's often. I then went on obviously to work in finance and to work in investment banking. None of those are particularly well known for being very strong on female representation, particularly investment banking. And there was often the response when we challenged people to say, well, why have you got such terrible ratios in your department? Is, well, we don't get women applying, and it becomes a bit of a vicious circle. If you don't have women there, you won't get women applying, because I don't want to go and work in an organisation, particularly where I'm the only one. So I suppose if you're thinking of a challenge for me, that's probably the biggest one. Is it has to come from both sides. The faculty or the organisation has to be welcoming and open to women, but equally the women have to want to do it. And sometimes it's really, that's a really tough call to choose to be the minority in the room. But I think if you do it, you'll find that you don't get treated any differently.
Thank you.
Thank you. So my next question is to Dr. Ahmad Shaikh. Just going back to the question that you were going to answer about thinking like engineer but executing like scientists. I think in my opinion, I think most of the time we think it's two different fields. You generally get scientists who do those stuff in lab, and then you as a chemical engineer come forward with a solution for that in a larger scale. Do you mind elaborating more on this statement?
So I think it's more of a mindset, right? So when I think like, what I mean by thinking like an engineer is objective functions. So there is a certain thing that I'm trying to improve upon, there's a certain thing that I'm trying to optimize, and then there are the details that you need to sufficiently understand to make sure that the outcome is robust. So I think there are two sides of the same coin. One is how you pose the problem, and then that's the engineering part for me, and then how you actually go about solving the problem, the level of rigor you need is more of the science part of it. So that's how I think about it. By and large, I think as everyone on the panel has said, the chemical engineering curriculum is designed for that diversity and breadth anyways. So I remember we took biochemistry classes, chemistry classes, material sciences classes, math classes, and then a whole lot of engineering. So if anyone can toggle between being a scientist and an engineer, I think we are best positioned to do so as chemical engineers.
Yeah, that's right. You mentioned quite a few times that you had a bit of a passion for aviation, and you even wanted to maybe switch paths. Do you think maybe at some point you'd be able to apply what you've learned as a chemical engineer in the industry to aviation?
Wow. That wasn't the question on this piece of paper.
I thought it was a bit repetitive.
Okay. The simple answer, I guess, is yes. When we look at some of the processes we're trying to develop, the first thing to mention there is sustainable aviation fuels. It is really driving that. There was an announcement in November, I think Virgin Atlantic, on the first fully sustainable aviation fuels flight. I did think I may drop several hints about trying to get on the flight deck for that, but that didn't materialise. But there are some challenges. It's not a case of just simply tweaking a process and going in there. There are so many standards associated with that. There are a lot of hurdles to overcome, particularly around the blend, the amount of aromatics in the fuel as well. So that's from a fuel perspective. Looking a little bit wider around how we can actually look at the transferable skills. Measurement is one of them. So to go back into the process industry, traditionally, when we look at a PFD from, say, 50 years ago, we'd recognise it now because we always measure a level, we always measure a temperature, we measure things that we always can measure. What we need to look at for all sectors is to actually say, what should we be measuring? So we've been doing some work on that in our previous group, saying, well, look, this is the most interesting thing around there. Is it the amount of bubbles in the system? Can we directly measure that rather than measure, temperature and infer it or something along those lines? So I think measurement is going to become more important as we go through, but also then the understanding of what we do with this large amount of data. We hear a lot in industry about artificial intelligence, machine learning, you hear it on the news and things, but actually one of the biggest things we found in applying some of these systems is the data engineering, actually getting the data into some sort of usable form before we start doing anything else with it. So I think the measurement, the data analysis is going to be transferable across a lot of industries.
Thank you.
Right. And my final question to Dr. Demi Taiwu. You mentioned a lot about your work with fuel cells and batteries, and now you're working at one of the most prominent companies in the UK. With every industry that pops up, there's always a major challenge. With oil and gas, it was the environment. Now with batteries and fuel cells, what the mining issues associated with it. How do you think the field of renewables is moving forward, and what do you hope to achieve with the future of renewable energy?
Okay, so how do I think futures of renewables is moving forward? I think progress is significant, and there's also a lot of government legislation that's been put in place to try and drive big corporations in that industry to promote their direction and move that direction towards, say, for example, net zero emission technology. So, obviously your renewables are your solar, your wind, geothermal, whatever, and those are very good sources, particularly for electricity generation. You've got your batteries and your fuel cells. Your batteries would be your energy storage devices that would help store the energy from those renewable sources, and you've got hydrogen, which is the energy carrier, which will help you generate electricity if you're able to create hydrogen. So I think pushing technologies that can help you to harness those intermittent supplies of energy, mostly the renewables, is a also important step. You need to get batteries to be cheaper, get them to be more sustainably, the raw materials sustainably sourced, and get them to be more environmentally friendly, particularly when they reach end of life. Infrastructure is also key, making sure different areas that need to introduce that technology, or different countries or environments that need that have that technology introduced into them, have the infrastructure to maintain and sustain them as well. So making sure there's hydrogen refill stations, for example, for hydrogen-based technology, having charging opportunities for say, for example, commercial vehicles that are electrically powered. So yeah, I think the future of using renewables is depending on how well you can store energy, particularly for electricity generation, storing the energy into batteries or in the form of hydrogen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. So this concludes our alumni session, where we wanted to reflect on the past 100 years of chemical engineering. I think in particular we're reflecting on the past 60 years. I would like to also thank at this point Asta and Muhammad for helping us to put together this session. They had actually many more questions to be asked, and there will actually be, that conversation will continue not only between you and our panelists, but also we have been carrying out some interviews next door with the Ramsey students. So thank you very much again for all your help in this event. And looking at the level of professionalism and the creativity and the work attitudes, I think we shouldn't be so worried about the future of chemical engineers. So all of them did an outstanding job. Thank you very much.
If we go in chemical engineering.
Okay, so I would say we close the session now with a big round of applause for our invited panelists.